cooperate. I'm Judy Russell. I'm the Dean of University Libraries. I'm very happy that you all have come to join us. We're very excited today to be celebrating a wonderful gift that Luis has brought to us of the collection of his father's photographs and other memorabilia. And we have a presentation that was developed by Dr. Lillian Guerra, who's our professor of history and specializing in Cuban history, among other things here. But she had major surgery this week, so she is unable to be here in person, but she will Zoom in at the end for the question and answer session. So in her stead, Margarita Vargas Betancourt, who is our special collections librarian for Latin American and Caribbean collection, is going to do the presentation that Lily prepared. And she will be followed by Marta, who has actually been curating all of the photographs and other things that Luis so kindly gave to us. And then they will join Luis on the stage at the end, and Lily is going to Zoom in, and we'll be able to have a Q&A session. So if you have a question or a comment that you want to make, I would ask that you raise your hand, but then wait for someone to bring you a microphone, because we are recording the event and we'll want to be able to capture your question as well as the response that you get. But again, we're just so delighted that you're here for this very special day. And I'm going to turn it over to Margarita and let her start.
I want to see if this works. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, as you heard, my name is Margarita Vargas Betancourt. I work in special collections in the Latin American and Caribbean collection. Bienvenidos, esta es su casa. It is a great honor to have you here, especially Guayo's family. This is a first for me. I've never seen like all of the living family of somebody that's in our collections. So this is amazing. Thank you. It is an honor to read Professor Guerra's paper. I know that you might be disappointed because I'm not Professor Guerra, but I'll try my best to do a good job. I promise, Professor Guerra, not to get off script. And I'm going to start reading then. Eduardo Guayo Hernández, Visual Media and the Quest for Cuban Democracy by Lillian Guerra, for the inauguration of the Eduardo Guayo Hernández collection. I want to begin by thanking Luis Hernández Abreu for this extraordinary gift of his father's life work, his memories, and his family's many, many contributions to the history of Cuba. This donation invites all of us, especially future researchers and generations of Cubans, to step back in time, analyze its injustices as well as its beauty, and move forward toward a better society. I also want to thank the team at the University of Florida Libraries who have made the acquisition of the Guayo collection possible, particularly Dean Judy Russell, for whom the collection and conservation of Cuba materials has been a major achievement and a personal passion, as well as her excellent staff, whose work has been instrumental in making my own presentation tonight possible. In this regard, I deeply appreciate the efforts of John Nemmers, Marta Kapelewski, Laura Perry, Dr. Margarita Vargas Betancourt, and Misty Colson. I also want to acknowledge a former Gator and champion of archives who introduced me to Guayo's son, Luis, our donor, almost exactly a year ago in February 2023. Thank you, Richard Dennis. And Richard Dennis is here. Can you please say, yeah, there he is. We're beginning with technical difficulties, sorry. There. From the 1940s to the 1970s, perhaps no other photojournalist contributed more to the Cuban people's struggle to democratize the government and political culture than Eduardo Hernández Toledo, better known as Guayo. Entirely self-taught, Guayo proved as skilled as he was daring. Throughout nearly 4 decades of documenting pivotal events, Guayo inhabited Latin America's intimate and collective realities. With passion and what can best be described as a sense of mission, Guayo also defied journalistic convention. He created photographs, newsreels, and films that opened questions and sought answers, not only from a diverse array of political leaders, but from citizen viewers themselves. As a freelance photographer and pioneering cinematographer, Guayo catapulted his career in the early 1940s by defying president and strongman General Fulgencio Batista's journalistic ban by audaciously filming the final moments of a convicted German Nazi spy's execution in Cuba. From that point forward, Guayo's commitment to empowering citizens to know and thereby feel an active part of the reality never diminished, but only grew stronger. Over the course of the first 20 years of his career, from the early 1940s to the early 1960s, Guayo consolidated the centrality of independent media to Cubans' definitions of democracy. In his pursuit of images that would inform the public during Cuba's democratic years, 1940 to 1952, Guayo helped citizens to demand accountability from elected officials. Guayo never shirked from the possibility of documenting key moments of struggle, human suffering, and violence, even to the point of putting himself in the line of fire. This meant that Guayo not only captured critical images, but he also made viewers feel that they were equal witnesses to such events. Everyone could see beyond official narratives to draw their own conclusions, with Guayo's camera lens on their side. Most of these images, especially the moving pictures on which my own presentation will focus, have not been seen since they were originally projected. Filmed, produced, and edited by Eduardo Guayo Hernández in his own studio, Noticuba, these newsreels are time capsules that reflect the massive political upheavals and emotional moral struggles that Cubans endured in the 1950s and the early 1960s. Importantly, Guayo was not making photographs and documentary footage for an unsophisticated audience. Perhaps more than any other country in the hemisphere except for the United States, Cuba in the 1940s and 1950s was the principal leader in terms of its citizens' accessibility to radio and television. Cuba also stood out for the independence of these media from the national state and foreign companies' interference, especially in the years before Batista's coup of 1952 that installed a military dictatorship and ended constitutionally elected government. At the time, Cubans enjoyed some of the widest access to sound and visual media in the world, with a population that numbered less than 6 million. Cubans enjoyed over 900,000 radios and 365,000 television sets, an average of 1 radio per 6 inhabitants and 1 TV for every 25. Although largely located in Havana and other industrial cities like Cienfuegos, Cubans own more TVs per capita than any other country besides the United States, as well as almost exactly the same number of radios per capita. Indeed, Cuba boasted 11 nationally owned television stations by 1958. Cuban writers for both radio and TV sold thousands of scripts, more than any other country, that were restaged and localized across Latin America, from Argentina to Mexico. Cuba became, as a result, an admired cultural and technical powerhouse. Without a doubt, radio initially transformed the political landscape by bringing geographically and socioeconomically marginalized citizens to the political table. However, Cuba's greatest passion, movies, also featured equally popular newsreels. Their images equalized the knowledge of current events among non-readers and readers in ways that the print media could not. Newsreels like those made by Guayo's Noticuba also provided Cubans with the freedom to draw their own conclusions by giving them what no guided audio narrative could: visual evidence of reality. This was Guayo's mission. In March 1952, General Fulgencio Batista staged a military coup over Cuba's elected government, the second of two coups that defined Batista's career and diverted Cuba from the paths of democracy and economic sovereignty. Consequently, Guayo joined a handful of journalists, including his close friend and colleague Miguel Ángel Quevedo, director of Bohemia magazine, in relentlessly preserving the independence and documentary objectives of Cuban journalism. The Guayo collection at the University of Florida contains some of the best examples of this commitment. Guayo's camera documented a battle between Cuba's civilian opposition to the Batista dictatorship and Batista's reliance on stage spectacles and imagery as a substitute for legitimacy. For example, in 1955, Guayo produced a newsreel that featured evidence of a nighttime raid on the offices of Cuba's Federation of University Students, Federación Estudiantil Universitaria. And you can see some examples of the raid. Now, this talk has a lot of reels and movies, so I'm gonna move forward. I'm gonna let you see the three that have sound later on. Images of the raid accompany scenes of the welcome that Cuba's ousted president, Carlos Brioso Carras, received when he returned at FEU's invitation for a public debate on how to force Batista to give up power and return Cuba to a constitutional democracy. In 1957, Guayo produced ironic coverage of the dictator Batista and First Lady Marta Fernandez's annual personal gift of toys to impoverished Cuban children. The annual event took place on the Catholic Christian holiday of King's Day, January 6. As Guayo meticulously shows, Batista and Marta's toy distribution began selectively with fully uniformed army officials, many of them legendary for committing the worst atrocities against civilians and activists, getting first pick of bicycles, dolls, and teddy bears at Camp Columbia's, Cuba's largest military base. Then we see Marta with her staff handing out toys while thousands of Cuban moms line up under a hot sun under armed guard. Guayo's newsreel followed these scenes of Batista's personal generosity with a lavish nighttime Christmas ball held at Camp Columbia's Officer Club. And we're going to continue watching this clip because I really want you to see the ball. It's very interesting. So this is the Día de Reyes and los regalos, and we're going to see la fiesta de Pascua in a moment. So this is the lavish ball that Professor Guerra describes. In this clip, Guayo films members of the Cuban Air Force and Army as they gather on the tarmac after an allegedly victorious encounter with Fidel Castro's guerrillas. But he precedes that clip with obviously joyful scenes of the release of a government soldier after he had allegedly been held captive by opponents of the Batista regime. Guayo's commitment to capturing the truth in real time meant that he often unexpectedly subjected himself to unanticipated dangers. One of the most striking and never before seen examples of this occurred when Guayo was commissioned by José López Villaboy, a 20-year-plus veteran publicist and corrupt lackey of Fulgencio Batista, to promote Villaboy's privatization of Cuba's postal service and air carriers at Riddle Field in Clewiston, Florida. Batista wanted to be able to search and censor all mail coming from the US into Cuba. As the following clip shows, unarmed civic activists unexpectedly commandeer the correspondence that Batista was transporting from the United States to Cuba using Villavoy's aircraft. After filming an impromptu brawl on the tarmac, Guayo suddenly decided to jump aboard the departing getaway plane himself. Wait for it. In January 1959, revolutionary forces achieved an astonishing victory over the US-backed regime of Fulgencio Batista. While the real-life drama of these events seduced millions, Guayo strove to empower Cuban citizens through on-the-ground, unprecedented visual reporting. In footage Guayo shot in the first week of January 1959, Guayo documented the enormous trust between the Cuban people and the peasant foot soldiers of the 26th of July movement's rebel army at the site of the most potential conflict, the police and military headquarters at Caimanera, steps from Guantanamo Bay. As he filmed, crowds raided weapons caches and gave arms to the rebels, even as units of Batista's army considered the consequences of relinquishing power. Guayo's newsreel then literally put average Cubans into the driver's seat. Rather than film from the ground, Guayo's camera provides a bird's-eye view from aboard a helicopter as it tracks Fidel Castro's caravan of victory across the central plains of rural Cuba on the way to the capital of Havana. Then, Guayo films leaders' euphoric public reception alongside Fidel Castro and Comandante Camilo Cienfuegos, making the people, rather than the leaders of the revolution, principal protagonists of history. Still caught in the glow of that victory, Guayo made a documentary film called El Gran Recuento, The Great Retelling, released in the first few weeks after the consolidation of a revolutionary government in January 1959. It did not simply hail Fidel Castro, the 26th of July movement, or in fact, any armed oppositional movement. Instead, it mostly recounted unarmed civilians and civic leaders' defiance of Batista's militarism and use of mass public spectacles to craft false visual evidence of his regime's public credibility. Guayo also dedicated El Gran Recuento to the many journalists assassinated and tortured by Batista's security forces. And now we're going to see 3 clips. They have sound, and then they're quite something.
Aquí, en el mismo corazón de la Sierra Maestra, cuando la victoria estaba aún lejos, Cine Periódico entrevista al médico y revolucionario porteño.
Durante todos los meses, ya son 16 los meses que hemos estado en la Sierra Maestra, han venido periodistas de muchas partes del mundo y se han preocupado de la parte, digamos, anecdótica de esta guerra de guerrilla. Hoy aprovecho la oportunidad de la visita de un periodista cubano para dar al pueblo de Cuba el primer saludo que tengo oportunidad de dar. De un pueblo que he decidido defender, conociendo solamente a través de la acción y del pensamiento de nuestro jefe Fidel Castro.
Ahora, el comandante Ramiro Valdés.
Al pueblo de Cuba, a punto ya de romper las cadenas, un saludo, así como nuestra fe en el triunfo y el propósito de que nuestra Cuba futura esté a la altura de la sangre derramada y los sacrificios realizados.
La población campesina tan pobre, tan sufrida, recibía atención de los médicos rebeldes. un brillante jurista y compañero en la prensa, el doctor Humberto Sorimarín, auditor general de la Revolución, dice unas palabras.
Estamos aquí en la Sierra Maestra luchando por nuestra firme convicción de que al desplomarse la sanguinaria dictadura, no solamente rescataremos nuestro régimen jurídico, sino que además se irá a la cura radical de nuestros viejos males, de los males crónicos de la República, y no volverán a ser jamás falsos postulados en la Cuba del futuro las palabras justicia y libertad.
Tiroteo, una victoria total. El casi legendario Che Guevara, victoriado por el pueblo villaclareño tras la liberación. Y aquí patriarcales las barbas, noble el gesto, Camilo Cienfuegos. Modesto y valiente el camarógrafo Ignacio Marín, autor del reportaje de acción más emocionante de la contienda. Los daños ocasionados a la propiedad son enormes, casas arrasadas por las bombas y la metralla, dolor y miseria. El precio de la libertad es siempre alto. Vencida la resistencia en Santa Clara, Fidel Castro concentraba sus tropas para el ataque a Santiago, pero el jefe del regimiento se dispuso a negociar la paz. Raúl Castro, el héroe de las dos sierras, asistía a la conferencia en que el coronel Rego Rubido rendía sus armas incondicionalmente al máximo jefe rebelde, prometiendo todos sus esfuerzos por la consolidación de la paz y el triunfo de los principios revolucionarios. El comandante Uber Matos, al frente de las tropas rebeldes que ocupan el cuartel Moncada, el mismo cuartel donde 5 años atrás fueran torturados y asesinados muchos combatientes del 26. Tiroteo.
The lessons Guayo learned from fighting Batista's dictatorship by documenting and highlighting its narcissism and unconstitutional hypocrisy, he soon, ironically, applied to the rising tide of authoritarianism that marked Fidel Castro's consolidation of rule. Over the course of a year and a half, following the founding of a revolutionary state in January 1959, Fidel Castro gradually abandoned his own allies and officials' humanist policies of ameliorating poverty and diminishing the dominance of massive states, latifundios, in favor of Communist Party rule and a government takeover of the economy. During these months, Guayo did not censor evidence of the precariousness of Cuban democracy. Deliberately, he documented its fissures and growing chasms, just as he had under Fulgencio Batista. Unlike most other news media of the time, even before its transformation into a Soviet-style state press, Guayo's newsreels resisted focusing on Fidel Castro as either the sole author of Cuba's liberation or the primary protagonist of events on the ground. Instead, Guayo's filmic vision indexed the activities of the revolutionary state with evidence of how it reproduced Batista's militarism and enforced unanimity. By the late summer of 1960, Guayo joined his closest friend and colleague in the press, Bohemia director Miguel Ángel Quevedo, into exile abroad. The latter 2 decades of Guayo's productivity as a photojournalist mirrored the demise of democracy in Cuba in the summer of 1960. As a witness and faithful documenter of the history of Cuba and Latin America more broadly, Eduardo Hernández Toledo's contributions are extraordinary. Well, thank you on behalf of Professor Guerra. And I now invite you to turn your attention to Marta Kapelewski, my dear friend, as she offers an even more rich and exciting tour of the unique and priceless Guayo collection. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? I guess so. Thank you to Luis for donating this beautiful body of work to us. Working on this collection has been an emotional experience for me, and I hope that you can see that through my presentation. And hello to Dr. Guerra. I don't know where you are, but I can see you, but hello to you. I'm glad you're doing better and hope to see you soon. So my presentation is about Eduardo Guayo. I call him Guayo, and it's going to be a journey through his life and work. It was really hard to decide what to include because there is so much visual material in this collection. It is incredible. Okay, so Chandler, what do I do? Nobody likes that sound. All right, so welcome to my presentation, and this is the Noticuba logo, and it has significance for Guayo, and perhaps Luis can tell me who the sculptor, where's Luis? Luis, who is the sculptor? You can tell us later. Dirube, I kind of thought that, but do you hear that echo? Can you hear me now? No echo. Is it too loud? No, it's perfect. Awesome. Okay, so let's start over. Welcome to the presentation. Now we can hear me clearly. I hear myself very loud. All right. So the Guayo collection contains documents, letters, newspaper articles, photographs, correspondence, films, documentaries, oral histories, and ephemera, and some of the cameras, some of his cameras and lenses. Guayo was one of Cuba's most celebrated cameramen, as they call them, and photojournalists of the 20th century. He was beloved by anyone who met him. They all love Guayo. There's a ton of photographs of Guayo. He was such a warm, loving personality, a lot of charisma. He was small in stature, but big in personality. The extent of the collection is 14.50 linear feet. It's distributed between 28 boxes, and it's arranged in 9 series. And I'm explaining that because that's where the finding aid looks like, and you can see that if you look at the finding aid, which is available online. The finding aid includes research done by Rochi Danesa, whom I met here today. She digitized and organized a lot of the collection prior to its donation to the library. Donated by his son, Luis Hernández Abreu, with the help of his older brother, Eduardo, who was gonna be here today, but could not. Glad he's getting better. And family and friends. The collection is a result of years of research in order to bring not only the body of Guayo's work, but also the history of Guayo himself. And I'm sure that Luis will be more than happy to talk about that. Finding this body of work was not an easy task because Noticuba and its film archives was taken over and confiscated by Fidel. In a letter addressed to the public, Opinion of America, Guayo stated that one of his reasons for leaving Noticuba, Bohemia, was the lack of freedom of the press that the Castro regime was demanding, and he refused to give in to these demands. In the letter, he declares that Noticuba, Bohemia, quote, will return to movie theaters as soon as liberty and democracy are reinstated in Cuba. And the moving images that you saw, Guayo constantly for years, he did film the news as they were happening, and then they would present that in the movie theaters. This is important later on for Yo Volveré, which it's a movie that he made. So this is the letter addressed to the public opinion of America, and this is in the collection. And the collection will be hopefully all digitized. Right now it's not all digitized, but we're hoping that it will be digitized. Guayo was born in 1916 in Havana, Cuba. He was self-taught, like Dr. Guerra said in her presentation. He became one of the premier cameramen and journalists in pre-revolution Cuba. He was kind and compassionate, beloved by the public and fellow journalists alike. And he was daring and brave, often putting his life in danger for the sake of the news. He worked as a cameraman. He worked as a cameraman for Noticiario Nacional de Cuba from 1942 to 1953. And he was an executive at Cine Periódico from 1953 to 1958, president and director of Noticuba Bohemia from 1958 to 1960. And here you can see one of the cars of the Noticuba fleet. I do not know how many cars they owned or had. This one says 5, so I don't know if that means they had at least 5. I don't know. Maybe Luis knows, I don't know. So these are highlights from Guayo's career in pre-revolution Cuba. These are digitized. We don't have the actual, it's digitized, thanks to Rochi. And these are the only 2 photographs known to exist of a Nazi spies, Heinz August Luning, executed at Castillo del Príncipe in Cuba in November of 1942. Now, the press was not allowed to go and participate on this, but Guayo, who was very, if he wanted to do something, he would do it type of person, he hid in the trunk of his vehicle and parked it as far away as he could get away, and then took these photos with a lens. And here's the spy, and this is minutes before his execution. So these are the only 2 known photos to exist of this event. Another highlight and great journalistic scoop for Guayo was what is known as La Masacre de Orfila, where Guayo filmed the action 3 meters away from the bullets. In this, people died, and through Guayo's movie, when they had the court case, the film itself was used in the case, and put highlights here of several things that we have from the collection, because for those of you interested in reading more about this from the collection, he kept appearing on the news himself, so particularly with this event as well. And here he is saying he was 3 meters away. And I'm going to show you what that means in the next slide. So the Orfila movie was presented in the movie screens as news. And at some point, they were like censored, but this man here, Genovevo, when he heard that, he said the movies are going to be shown in the theaters again. And he asked Guayo what he wanted as a reward for these movies. And Guayo said that he wanted to dress as a Mariscal of the Army, which is the highest honor. And Genovevo said, hey, I'm not even that. And he just gave it to Guayo, and that's the meaning of this photo. I love it, because Guayo is clearly having fun. And said, if you're gonna reward me, I wanna be your boss. Here, This is a little snippet from articles about Orfila, that Guayo's life was threatened and by one of the killers who was standing right by him. And if you want to see the meaning of 3 meters, I actually think 3 meters is generous. You'll see what I mean. This is where Guayo was. This is a machine gun shooting at the house. It's a very sad incident. And to me, he looks like he's closer than 3 meters away. But I mean, and I don't know if you can see it through there, but in the photo, you can see the smoke coming from the, and this is filmed. These are screenshots that I took. So this is on film. These are highlights from Guayo's career covering news for Bohemia before he went into exile. And the years are from multiple, I took images from multiple years. There's a lot. This is just a small sample. Here he is in Venezuela. Here he is in Nicaragua, Peru, Chile, Costa Rica. That's just half of that photograph. The album is, I mean, newspaper is very big. Here, there are amazing photos there. This is from Ecuador, an earthquake on 1949, which was absolutely devastating. The photographs are unbelievable. This is clearly paper that has become yellow and with age, so it doesn't show the clarity. The negatives too. This is from Colombia, El Bogotazo. In here, I believe that he met Fidel on the streets in Colombia and actually helped Fidel escape from this situation, which was very bad. And there he is in Mexico. So he traveled all over the world. There, I could have selected images from his travels in Argentina, England, but I can only do so much. Otherwise, we'll be here until next week. These are close-ups because you can see of the Bogotazo. Now, I don't know about you, but when I see these images, this photograph to me is like, he was such a good photographer. Self-taught, I mean, I find this extremely good. Anyway, these are close-up of the images that appeared on from the earthquake in Ecuador. And again, we have some negatives of this. These, I actually scanned these, but if we get the collection digitized, they could be scanned in a better manner. This is not the best scanning possible. I wish, but it isn't. So now, these are highlights from the news features that Guayo produced. He covered all of the life and history, good and bad, of Cuba. And he put them into these little documentaries that he would present. And it's hard to choose images from them, but these are screenshots from films we have. This is a kindergarten party graduation. This is a screenshot from the Fiestas de Pascua, or the Christmas New Year's Eve, in Dr. Guerra's video. This is a milk company factory. Miss Cuba. I don't know if Cuba kept doing Miss Cuba after 1960. Maybe you can ask Dr. Guerra, but I don't know. But it seems to me that if Miss Cuba stopped after 1960, then these are the last images of Miss Cuba. And I have negatives of the actual Miss Cuba, and she was very beautiful. I just didn't put it there. This is an image from, I believe, and if some, Richard, if you know, I think this is from an orphanage. And I love this photograph because of its composition. And Guayo, I don't think I included it here, but there's another photograph where the composition is similar of ballerinas, and it's absolutely stunning. And this is a photograph of the University of Graduation. More images from all these snippets that Guayo took. This is from the dredging of Havana Bay. This is from Hacienda by Tiquiri, which was a ganaderia. How do you say that? How do you say ganaderia in English? Cattle factory. Which the images from that are these beautiful. These animals were absolutely stunning. And Guayo, as you will see later, keep these photographs in mind when I talk about Joe Volvere. I love this photograph of the Jose Marti Airport. I don't know where he was when he took it, but I think that's an amazing photo. I'm a total Guayo fan. I've become obsessed with Guayo. Like, more images. This photograph is beautiful. This is from the flower market in Havana. These are public works. And this is something that Batista was fixing the roads, and Guayo filmed all this. There's a lot of that there. This is harvesting coffee. This is for Hacienda by Tiquiri. This is from a movie called Jambao. And here is another image from Hacienda by Tiquiri. So in here, these are screenshots from the Guayo movie, De la Tiranía a la Libertad. This documentary film tells the story of the crucial years of the revolution and the Movimiento 26 de Julio under the leadership of Fidel Castro, 1952 to 1959. In this photograph, it's from Batista going somewhere that is a screenshot that I put there. And I put this image here because I think it's stunning. Fidel Castro was sentenced in 1953 to 6 years in prison after the failed Moncada barracks coup attempt. In 1955, Batista no longer considered Castro a threat and pardoned him. And Guayo filmed him, Castro, and his brother Raúl as he was leaving the Prisión Modelo in Isla de Pinos. And I think that this is of great historical importance. And we're lucky we have them. These are other screenshots that I took from De la Tiranía a la Libertad. Images are similar to the movies that Dr. Guerra showed in her presentation. However, I chose to show you different images from the movie, which are, it's kind of surreal to me, but here are people getting guerrillas and how they actually lived in the Sierra Maestra. Here's a woman, I don't know if you can see her very clearly, she's sewing. Here are people receiving donations for food. Here they are making bread. Here's a photograph of screenshot of Fidel Castro reading a book. And I suspect that this is the radio that was used to broadcast those radio messages from Dr. Guerra's film. And here is a printing press. So these were people in the Sierra Maestra. This is how they lived and worked while doing the revolutionary activities. I think these images are great. Guayo himself gets photographed. Here in this photo, he was actually sleeping on a plane, and someone took his photo because he was beloved by everybody, and he was not only snapping, but people snapped at him all the time, like trying to get Guayo. And they took him because, as you can see, he doesn't have his shoes on, and he is hugging the camera. And the caption says that Guayo loves his camera so much that he doesn't even, he sleeps with it and never lets it go. There's another, I didn't put it here, but it's in the collection. There's a beautiful photo of Guayo, and it has the caption, El pollo masculino. So I was thinking, how do I translate that into English? And I'm like, the ham, I'm like, no, there's no way. So it has to be El pollo masculino. It's a great shot, but that's to say how good looking he was. Life after the exile. one thing that is not here, but it is in the collection, and you can read it and absorb it when there's actually, and somewhere that says it somewhere, that when Guayo and Agustín Alles Soberón, who were the first journalists to reach, Cuban journalists to reach Sierra Maestra and interview Fidel Castro, and they lived there for months, taking all these images. I lost my train of thought. Sorry. Let's continue. So, yes, I know what I was going to say. That when they were there, they realized that the meaning of the revolution was changing. Soberón and Guayo realized that what everybody was thinking is going to be the revolution, and Dr. Guerra can correct me if I'm wrong, or someone in the audience, but they realized that the revolution was probably not going to be what they thought. They saw a change in the conceptual message of the revolution with what they were seeing. And in early 1960, Guayo left, just like a lot of other people. So this photograph is President Kennedy motorcade, and we have film of this in Florida in December 1962. And why is Guayo taking this photo, these images? Because of the Brigada 2506. They were the men who went on the Bay of Pigs mission. A lot of them, I believe a little over 900, were prisoners in Cuba. And they, after negotiating, they were released from Cuba, the majority of them. And President Kennedy honored them in a ceremony in the Orange Bowl in Miami in December 28, 1962. And the Brigada 2506 gave President Kennedy their flag. And the collection has a lot of images from this event, and they're all amazing. Not all of them are digitized, but again, hopefully they may all be. So more highlights from Guayo's career after he left Cuba. Activities with Brigada 2506. In 1964, he went with them for a training mission. That journal, we have an actual copy of it and printed images, scanned images, and it's really good. The photographs are incredible. These are images from Guayo on the boat. And they're great photographs. This is, I put it here because this is a reprint of this article, somewhat. And this is in honor of Manuel Artime when he died in 1978. This was published, and Guayo wrote this article using images from the 1964 mission. Okay, so Yo Volveré is a movie that Guayo made to remind and to show the world what Cuba was. All those images that I was showing you in the beginning of life in Cuba, like this one, Guayo used them at the Hacienda Baitiquiri, like here. This is a shoe factory. This is from Obras Públicas, school children, schools, to show how life was in Cuba before the revolution. Tropicana girls. So what Guayo did is he spliced all his work together to make this movie. And we have hundreds of negatives like this. But they are all categorized now and organized. So, Historia de una traición. It is the story of the betrayal that Guayo felt that Fidel Castro did to the people of Cuba. And we have not been able to see the actual film because it's on 5 reels and it needs conservation treatment. But there's a lot of material on Historia de una Traición throughout the collection. But seeing this advertisement for the movie and this word, it affected me in a way because it provoked a thought. How the same word, ayúdala, which means help her, means something different this time around. Because the first time that he asked the public for help for Cuba was helping the revolution, give money to the revolution by showing Sierra Maestra, Baluarte de la Revolución. That was in 1959. So here he is completely reversing his own thinking and asking for help for Cuba. We have the Sierra Maestra, Baluarte de la Revolución in the collection, and that is digitized. Now in Yo Volveré, El Che Guevara died while he was doing Yo Volveré, and he decided to produce a documentary on El Che based on his archival material, which he had a lot, and knowledge of these people. Guayo knew Fidel Castro and El Che Guevara know these people deeply well. So another highlight from the 1960s is that Guayo appeared in The Alligator, which is our newspaper from the UFL. He appeared in, this is not in the collection, but I found it, and I thought it would be interesting for all of us to know. So he appeared in The Alligator in Florida in 1970 on April 27. And it talks about the missions that he went with Alpha 66 in 1970, which is here. This is an article in Patria about an Alpha 66 mission to Cuba. And in this particular mission, 2 Cuban ships were sunk by the Alpha 66 people. And they actually captured the Cuban fishermen on the boat. And you can see images of them here. We have actual photographs in the collection. Alpha 66 published a statement, international statement, that they did not hurt these people. Guayo did a lot of work. He worked in El Miami Herald, and he worked in El Nuevo Dia. After he lived in Puerto Rico, and then from Puerto Rico, he went to Miami. These are images that I took that were impressive because I wanted to show his skills as a human photographer of beauty. Because Guayo throughout his life saw so much death and devastation, truly, truly horrible things. And then at the same time, he could do beautiful ethereal photographs. That's, to me, I find that incredible. So here's a replica article that they did for Replica magazine about Lucy Arnaz. And Desi Arnaz was there, so Guayo met him as well and took a great photo of Desi. And there's a lot of negatives of Lucy Arnaz that have not been scanned. There's like 100 of them. He took a lot of photos. I don't know who of you knows Charo, but she was very popular, very beautiful. I don't know if she's still alive. Is she still alive? So when I saw these photographs, I scanned these images myself. I don't know who has seen these photos. I don't know if they've been seen. I could not find anything in the collection. I could not find why did he, I'm assuming it was for an article somewhere, but the photographs are spectacularly good. This image of Raquel Welch, I find that the photograph, I hope that you can see right there, her eyes. That's skill. That is skill. You can see the texture of her jacket and her beauty. And I don't know who that was, but here he is, her friend, because he's in a lot of the negatives where, you know, there's like 6 or 7 negatives of Guayo catching her at the airport. And he was edited out for the magazine. They're like, we just want her, not him. These are photographs that I selected from his work from Sarita Montiel. I don't know why the photo is there. Luis may know, but I think it's a spectacular photo. She was a Spanish actress and performer. It's a beautiful photo. Guayo did photographs of Ali for El Miami Herald. And this is one of the best photos of Ali I have ever seen, in my opinion. Same with Pele. And up close, when you see the negative on the photo, her hair, you can see the texture and the different colors in all the way down. He was such a good photographer. And here he is with Enrique Bravo. He took this photo with photographer to photographer, and he was a friend of Enrique Bravo because Guayo was Cuban, and I didn't know that until I did this collection. And he was sort of like a mentor. Guayo was a mentor to him, and they worked together. And Enrique Bravo is listed as a cameraman in a lot of the items that we have on the collection. So there is an album that is called Álbum Hecho por Guayo en Puerto Rico. So this album is very important. And the reason why it's important was given to me by Luis. Because in talking to Luis one time, I said, I love the album Hecho en Puerto Rico, that is so good. And Luis explained to me that Guayo did that album because when he wanted to leave Puerto Rico to work at the Miami Herald, they said, well, do you have a resume? Does Guayo have a resume? And Guayo said, you want a resume? Here's a resume. And he put this album all together, which is great. It's very delicate. I wanted to go to conservation. But it's great because in this album, he creates it and he puts in there the highlights of his life and things that are important to him. And it needs to be totally intact. Like this album needs to be, if there's ever follow an archival principle, keep this one as is. But clearly he was very close to his friends and photographers from El Nuevo Dia. And I think that they were more like a gang of friends that enjoy working together. It definitely looks like that. And this is a special Nuevo Dia, where's that? A feature where it was dedicated to the photographers who are Gary Williams is this guy here. No, this is Gary Williams is this one. I need new glasses. I'm like, here is Luis Ramos. This is Antonio Luis Ferrer. He's the owner of El Nuevo Dia. Here's Guayo. And here is Frank Camacho. And so when I saw this photo, physically, I'm like, what am I looking at? Because it was a little bit unclear until I saw the photo. This edition, where is it? This has images from all of them featuring, okay, so Frank, this is Guayo's selection for the, where is it? Here we go. This is Guayo's selection for the special report. And I couldn't recognize what I was looking at first until I really saw. And when you see it, you cannot unsee it because it's so good. And this is a boxing match, and it doesn't do it justice here, but you can see the punch, the sweat. Is an amazing photo. I wish we had a negative of this. I really do, because we could enhance that. Now, I did not touch or retouch any of these images. I left them all as is, clearly, because I cannot, I cannot take the yellow out for the president. Like, you're seeing things as they are. Another thing that he put there, as this in particular is very frail, and I have that secure. But this is titled Lo que vi en Cabo Cañaveral, and this is a report that he did with his dear friend, Carlos Castañeda. And here's images from the Puerto Rican event at the university where people died, and we have photos on the display. There are amazing photographs of action and more bullets. And someone said, are you scared of bullets? And Guayo, who had a lifetime of being surrounded by bullet war, he said, no, I'm not scared of the bullets. Just be scared when you don't hear them. While you're hearing them, just go for it. So he was really, and he was like in his 50s there. He was very, This, I included the picture of the Liza Minnelli because when you see it up close, I think that Guayo somehow captured the essence of people in his portraits. If he had been a portrait photographer, he would have been among the best in the world, but that is my opinion. Because her expressions and what he captured from it's excellent. These images are from a circus performance I was in Puerto Rico in 1972, and he climbed above higher than the performers so that he could take a better shot. And that was just like in the lion picture that is out there, he went inside the lion's cage so he could take the photo without, he didn't want the fence between him and the lion. He wanted to see. And that one, it's this one here, but this one you can see it bigger in our display. But I wish you could see this image. Is so beautiful. Her flying in this. Okay. So now this is, I'm being a little bit selfish here because I'm going to talk about a personal highlight from processing this collection. It was like an eureka moment that I found out. When I saw this scan image, I didn't know what I was looking at. And then I looked at it up close to try to get the name of this ship, and I found the name, and then I was like, it was used by the Red Cross. And learning that allowed me to kind of understand a lot of the things that I was seeing in the collection about the Brigada 2506, families arriving from Cuba. It put a lot of things together, and this boat was used for that. But that was something that I was assuming with a certain degree of certainty. And then when I was like, go down the line, a few months later, when I'm looking for images to present to you, I decided to myself, let me show them from Guayo's own handwriting how he made notes for his movies. And I did two, and then I said, let me get the third. When I took the third and I read it, this is what I found. Llega el African pilot, el primer barco que manda. So Guayo himself told me that this is correct. My assumption about the Red Cross and families coming from Cuba, the Brigada 2506, he himself is telling me by his own handwriting, yes, this is it. So there's no doubt that this is that boat. Now, when I did this, I was in the grand reading room scanning, and because that's a quiet room, I couldn't actually scream Eureka, but I thought it. I was like, yes. It's good to have the certainty that what you are actually describing is correct. So these are my favorite photographs by Guayo. When I saw this photograph, I was like, what? It speaks for itself. This is Dinora del Real, photograph for Bohemia article at the Miguel Ángel Quevedo estate. I think that in the album Hecho por Puerto Rico en Guayo, he has an actual crumpled pages of this article. But luckily, we have actual negatives, and but we had also the printed image. And this photograph from El Ecuador earthquake, if I was asked to visually represent despair, sadness, faith, and paradoxically, hope and hopelessness, I would choose this photo. There's no other way to describe this photograph. Goodbye, Guayo. The collection contains many tributes to Guayo upon his death that are clear representations of the love that Guayo inspired in friends and coworkers. As beautiful as they are, and I have tons of them that I actually deleted them from the presentation, because the one that truly, truly is the most beautiful is the one by Carlos Castañeda. It is a beautiful tribute to Guayo. There are no more such a clear expression of love. So I decided to just keep it with that. And I may actually translate this and put it on the finding aid. Now is my favorite photo of Guayo. This is my favorite photo of Guayo, and I'm going to explain why. When I first saw this image, I was like looking through thousands of images between printed negative slides. And when I first saw it, I looked at it quickly and I thought he was, for some reason, I thought, oh, he's walking on a slightly covered snow parking lot. You know, I thought snow. When I looked closer later, I could see that he's walking on a parking lot. This is my favorite photograph of Guayo because to me, this photograph summarizes the essence of Guayo, looking at the world as his tabula rasa, always alert and ready to take just one more photograph. He's looking at the world. So what Guayo means to me. Working on this collection has truly been an honor. I have learned many things. I have understood many things, discovered many things. If Cuba, as Colombo said, is the most beautiful land that human eyes have ever seen, through the eyes of Guayo, I have seen the evidence of the beauty of the Cuba that once was. Thank you.
Well, I hope you have enjoyed these wonderful presentations. Now, Luis, if you would join Margarita and Martha on the stage. And I think Todd is going to bring Lily in by Zoom. Is that right? How do we?
Yeah.
I'll let you take care of the technology here. Yep, bring your microphone with you so people will hear you. We'll be willing to take questions and comments. And so if you're interested in that, raise your hand and someone will bring you a microphone so that we can capture your question on the recording. Oh.
Yes. Oh. I need this in case I get asked a question.
Do we have to share? I can pass this one to someone as soon as I'm done, but where are we doing with Lily? Ah, I see. Yeah. But we should be able to see her, right? Lily,
I can hear you,
If you
but
hear me, please turn your camera on so we can see you.
yes, it says unable to start video because the host has stopped
The
it.
microphone's moving, but I'm not hearing anything.
It says unable to start video because the host has stopped it.
Well, why don't we start the Q&A while you try to get her running in the background? Okay, let's do that. Okay. So are there some of you who would like to make questions and comments? I would just like to say once again that you can see how much this collection has moved us all, and especially Martha, and what an enormous gift it is to have this record that he created over so many years. So I hope Luis in particular, but all of you feel that it is in a wonderful home where it will be taken care of and used and valued for many, many years to come. So thank you so much. All right. Okay.
Actually, this is a comment. That last picture of Guayo, when you said it was the essence of Guayo, it was. And one of the things in that picture is the red pants. Okay, that was Guayo. I mean, he and the color red, you know, and those pants, I mean, literally, I just couldn't, it just totally created a lot of emotion seeing that picture because it reminded me of who Guayo was.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a question over here on this side of the room.
Hello.
It's on, yep.
Yeah, it appears that during Guayo's lifespan, he saw the whole gamut of different governments, the constitutional government, dictatorships, an attempt to, a revolution. As a journalist and a photojournalist, did he mostly remain neutral politically, or did he have a favor towards conservatism, liberal, or I'll be interested in knowing.
I would say that.
Here, Richard.
Yeah.
And I think Lillian Castañeda, who's Carlos Castañeda's widow, can probably tell me, can probably confirm this, that they were anti-Batista, but they were probably moderate left, right? If we had to pick a political, even though Guayo covered the news in, I think, an objective manner, as objective as you can, center left. So I would say he was probably center left. Yeah.
Thank you. First, Luis, it's a fantastic legacy for your father. I know you and Daniel and your brother are part of the legacy, but this is a legacy that helps last forever here. And then the question I had was, I think at the beginning, somebody mentioned he sort of came upon it by accident or stumbled upon photography. Do you know how that was? Do you know how he ended up doing the first photograph and how he continued?
Oh. Actually, he started photography with a borrowed camera, if you want to say, and that's how everything started. And I'm the youngest son. My name is Louis, anyway, and I just want to take this moment to, on behalf of my brother who couldn't be here, my two nieces, Adriana and Orietica, my nephew Daniel, I want to thank UF, Judy, and Martha and Lily,
who has now joined us on the screen.
Hey, Lily. But anyway, to make a long story short, I've had all these pictures hanging in my wall. You visited my home, and it was kind of hard to let go. I grew up with Kennedy in my bedroom, and all these memories. And my oldest brother always said, we had to do something with this. We have to do something. And I really didn't know what to do. So 7 years ago, I met, and then I met Rochi, we'll call it by accident. And then one day Richard calls me that Lily wants to come over to my house to see what I had. She walked in, she said, it's mine. And I'm like, wait a minute, it's not that easy. I just can't let go. So I would tell my friends, they're coming to take my things, and they go, no, you're giving that to them. You're giving it to them. So all my friends are here in my family, and they've all been a part of this. They pushing me and saying, you can do it. It's been a labor of love, and the Castañeda clan is here, which is the daughters of Carlos, who Martha presented also. So it's an honor, really, because they've also pushed me, through these years of I'm living my wildest dreams right now. And it's a true honor for UF to have this collection, because I know with Martha, the first time she met, we started crying, basically, regarding, and I know it's safe, and I know it's going to be well, but so the world can enjoy my father's work. And there was one thing about that last picture. Millie said about the red pants, but I saw his finger. Yeah. Yes, and he always pointed the finger. So, exactly. So Lily, please join us. And Lily has been, we've had our moments. I've had a moment with all of these people, either good or bad, screaming or being frustrated or not knowing, except with Martha, not with Martha. But it's been incredible. It's really, once, you were at my house that morning, that you sat with me on the floor, started wrapping everything, I sense a sense of ease, knowing that it was going to be okay. So I'm really.
And I do remember that morning, and I could sense the bittersweetness of the parting, and that you wanted it to come, but it was stripping away.
Yes.
And your first visit here after the collection had come, when you met with Marta and you saw how they were beginning to process it, and you saw where we had hung the Marti portrait, which a number of you will see after the event, the joy, and I felt, oh, you now felt relief and happiness where it didn't feel quite so much like a separation and more like a fulfillment. And so
Correct.
we're so pleased with that.
And I also wanted to mention in one of the pictures that you showed, the young boy feeding the cow.
Yeah.
That's my George, my brother.
Oh, I was wondering who the
That was
child
like, oh,
was.
there's George. And then most of my cousins back there, they also appeared in the newspaper. You know, we were like part of the newspaper also. And we were like fillers when we were kids and travel with dad and take pictures and help him carry everything. So it's kind of like reliving our lives, you know, even though I wasn't born in Cuba, but you know, seeing the pictures of Miami, Puerto Rico, the circus, we were there. You know, we saw my dad further up than the actual artist. Then people were pointing and not at the artist, they were pointing at my dad. So it was like, it's like reliving, you know, my life again. So it's a truly honor.
Wonderful.
Can
Do we
I
have
ask
some
you-
other questions or comments?
I just want to ask him something really quick. Do you know the Dinora Real, those?
Yeah, she was the queen of carnival.
Yes, is George the one in the
And
horse?
yes, that's my brother.
Oh, I'm gonna select,
Yes.
I'm gonna screenshot and send to you.
Okay, thank you.
Because that's beautiful too. I didn't include that there, but.
I'm not here for questions and answer. I'm just here.
To
Just in
celeb-
case.
To celebrate
And
with
another
us.
thing, my father passed away when I was 14. I was very young. So all this was kind of put away, you know, until, so with you doing your research, I'm also learning. I mean, I've learned a lot from Richard. You know, we also had the experience of going to Cuba, to Bohemia. You know, I went there looking for nothing and I found everything. Amparo went with me to Cuba. She acted like my secretary while she was writing down everything people were saying, you know. And one thing, my friend Bruno Maritza there, you know, when all this process a year ago, I came to an event here at UF and someone asked him, why are you doing this? And his answer was, why not? So, you know, and that always stuck with me. So, you know, this has been a process and, you know, I see Soy, my cousin also, you know, we grew up with, you know, part of the family, you know, and this is, you know, there was an essence, you know, and my father was artistic, colorful, human, giving, you know, and it was just for the time that he was present in my life, it really impacted me, you know, and it's just, you know, and for everyone to learn. So, okay, Bruno, you can ask.
Lily, is there something you would like to say? We're delighted you've been able to join
I
us
know,
at
I'm
least
sorry.
virtually.
I really
Oh,
didn't want to speak, but it's Lily's turn because
Oh.
she deserves, you know, also to be part of this. I'm so sorry that you couldn't be here with us, but
Yes, I wanted to first thank you for the extraordinary
hear you.
donation
Sure.
for all that. Can you hear me? Because
I'm not
I,
hearing you.
uh-oh. Well, I'm unmuted.
No.
No.
No, I have not
I'm gonna see
muted
if we can
myself.
increase the volume at this end. Hold on a second.
1 second.
Okay, because I was not
While we're
muted.
waiting. Yes, who was?
I think you answered part of it. I was going to say, if you could share some of your experiences when you went to Cuba several times to get some of the media out and whatever you could share on that, I think there would be some interest.
Actually, it wasn't nothing planned. I went there just to meet people and to find, to see what I could find really. And, you know, things were given to me, you know, like a book, you know, that picture of my dad in front of the White House. And I just took a USB and I really didn't want any of the original because I think, you know, taking it from Cuba would be, you know, I had a mixed feeling. I was just there to learn and to see. None of this was in the plan, but you know, as I just brought it, you know, it was nothing thought about. You know, did I get nervous? Yes, but they were personal pictures. I went there with no political agenda or nothing. I went there to explore and to see what I could see and find.
Can I add to your question about that? all the things he researched on all the oral histories and all the research on the collection, including from a researcher who wanted to make a movie and documentary about Guayo called Jorge Dalton. We have all his trips and
Yeah.
everything.
And that's something I also want to mention, that when my first trip, I was like, kind of like, I didn't know what to expect. And Rochi said, find someone over there so he could take pictures and document your trip, you know, and it was like 4 days of just meeting people and this photographer behind me, and everyone was looking at me, not knowing who I was. I felt kind of embarrassed, but thanks to her suggestion that everything was, you know, taking pictures. And also when I went with Richard, you know, everything was documented. You know, and something, even though my dad had to leave Cuba, the few people that knew him or knew about him, they regarded him as a great photographer. They always acknowledged his work. It wasn't pro or against, so it was basically of his work it was remembered by.
Can I try this again?
Yes, wonderful, hooray.
Oh, thank God. Okay. Well, first I want to say that Margarita, I have some classes you could teach for me. You did. I mean, it was an honor to work with Margarita to make this happen. And I want to thank Luis very personally, and Marta as well, for all the extraordinary, Luis for the extraordinary donation, and Marta for all the extraordinary work that she put into the processing of this collection. There is nothing more important for historians and for Cubans everywhere than their history. Certainly for Cubans, their history matters now perhaps more than ever before. And I wanted to start, I just wanted to say that, and I'm very happy to answer questions that anyone would have about the collection or about Guayo or his context that I can answer.
Well, thank you, and we're glad you're here, and we're wishing you a speedy recovery. Are there other people with questions? You've got this mic, and then I'll get one to you. No. Push it up.
Now do you hear me? There we go. Well, I got to say, Louis, I met you here a few months ago, and I was just impressed with the type of personality and your outgoingness that I could see that this is a very special person, which makes the DNA or the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So I can see where your dad would have that same type of personality and resilience. So my question is where did your father get his resilience to be a photographer? What really drove him as a young man, and what inspired him to do that?
Well, he always strived to be the best. He always tried to be to beat his colleagues to the best picture. You know, nothing was ever good enough for him. You know, I remember what Martha's saying, that he took a lot of pictures, you know, to only choose one. You know, and that was, you know, he would have a couple of rolls of films just to pick one. And I think back in the day, they restricted him to like one roll or something while he worked at the newspaper. And that was not acceptable. You know, he just took as many rolls as he wanted. I think through his life, you know, just being the best, really, and showing the truth, you know, that made him who he was, you know, and that's what I, you know, not the word no was not in his vocabulary. So it was just always getting the best shot.
I have a question for Lily. Now that you have all this information and you're creating all this, are you going to be teaching the class and bringing the discussion in the class about Guayo and his life and his legacy?
Well, the nice thing is that I already teach a class called Film, Image, and Revolution in Cuba, and we already used to engage with Guayo. One of the most important, probably the most democratizing columns of the political sphere in Cuba was always the press, and before it becomes the arm of the government, truly the arm of the government in 1960, in May and August of 1960, under Fidel's communizing regime, the press played an extraordinary role in simply documenting sort of the minor and the major streams of civic activity, protests. I mean, anything that was really of an importance to the local community was an importance to the national community in Cuba. And you only have to look at the national press, which was very vast, as I noted in my talk, from 11 television stations to hundreds of newspapers. I mean, literally hundreds. So to recognize the importance of the local to the national to the local. So Guayo was there already, and what makes this an extraordinary leap forward for us as a teaching and researching community is that we have extremely unique footage that has been censored or simply completely neglected or deliberately destroyed in Cuba. And so the clips that I showed in particular, that I had Margarita show you from my presentation, are among the most taboo. And that's why they've never been seen since. Even just the clip from A Gran Recuento, where you have Fidel sitting as an equal negotiator before the flight of Batista with officers of Batista's army, reveals so much about the reality that it wasn't just like a fait accompli. It wasn't inevitable that either Fidel or his forces would have assumed power. And it shows the degree of willingness to negotiate for an end to the war, and to the war that was mostly really taking place in the cities as opposed to the countryside. And the Sierra Maestra was a very safe place until the last couple months of the war, for at least for the guerrillas. And I want to say that Guayo really did risk his life along with many other journalists, but in particular, if you were Cuban, it's far easier to be a foreign journalist and get access to the rebels than it was to be a Cuban. So I certainly, to again back to your question, we have like a ton of material that we can use. On the other hand, there is a lot that is still currently inaccessible, even to me, that I haven't seen because we don't have the funds to digitize it. So Marta has an amazing guide, and she has a lot of stuff that is only available to her or to others who are librarians right now. And I'd love to see that. Especially I have to say, the stuff about the exile period. I mean, there is a forgotten story of Cubans really on the ground attempting to remind each other that it wasn't just with us or against us. There was pluralism in Cuba prior to Fidel, and that was what supposedly Fidel was fighting for, and that was also what a huge majority of the exiles were fighting for, which is a pluralistic political culture and not just a right wing or a left wing political culture. And that's very much in the Guayo collection, very much there. So we just need greater access to it with some more resources. I have lost you.
My question is for Marta.
Okay.
Towards the end, you actually show that picture of the SS African pilot. And was that picture taken, I guess, while you was already living in the United States?
Yes.
Was that taken upon its return trip from Havana Harbor as one of the exchange ships for the Bay of Pig prisoners? Was it in Port Everglades, do we know, or was it leaving the United States with the merchandise?
That photo is the ship arriving, and we have in the collection images of the families leaving, but also in Miami, and Brigada 2506 members that came from the ship. And it's in snippets here and there, like it's throughout some digitized items that we have in the collection. Of that ship, there's only like 3 negatives, but when I saw his handwriting saying this is the ship, it's like there's no doubt that that is a ship arriving with prisoners from Cuba and families, their families and families that were leaving Cuba at that time.
My understanding, because I was part of one of those ships, my family, not the first one, which was in 62 December, but there was another one in January and another one in February, and that's when we arrived. But there were altogether 9 of those ships exchanged for the Bay of Pigs prisoners. Only one returned to the United States with no refugees. On that very first trip, the Bay of Pig prisoners actually did not come on the ship. They apparently flew. And you have a picture over here, one of those, which is very significant because it says that they arrived. I didn't know where they had arrived. I know it was a U.S. base in Florida, but it was, what is that town? Homestead. Yes, so apparently it was in Homestead. And apparently some of the families came through there, but the actual prisoners came by flight. And that was like a day or two before the SS African pilot left Havana Harbor.
Oh, that makes sense. That explains, because there's gaps that we don't, and thanks to you for telling me that.
Now I want to know if he took more pictures of the other ships, because I would really be interested.
Yes, that would be.
I mean, I love that picture, but I wonder if there are more.
What I can do is to try to pin down the date, see if in those notes that I just discovered them, that I saw that by accident because, you know, kind of looking, I'm like, one more because, and I can see if there's a date somewhere where he was making those notes to obviously record and present it. So if there's a date, then I can let you know. If you leave me your name and email, I'll find it and see if I can find anything more. Because that would be awesome if it's the one that you came in. That would be great.
Hello. Hi, this question is for Professor Lilly. What was the ratio of the rebels that were in the Sierra Maestra and the people who were supporting Castro versus the number of people with Batista, as far as, you know, like what was the size between the two groups?
Yes. So, okay. So there are two answers to that question. One is the size of Batista's army, which was about 14,000. And the size of the actual rebel army was very small until the summer of 1958. So there was a Fidel Castro's column, which really never numbered more than a few hundred. And they grew from just 19 guys to little more than 350. Never really got beyond 500. However, Raul developed in that summer a second column, and which is why he's called the quote hero of the two Sierras. He went to Sierra Cristal, and there he really he didn't have the concerns that Fidel did. He really recruited anybody, which meant that he recruited a lot of riffraff, to be honest. And a lot of what Raul's forces did was often to simply do sweeps over areas, find informants, allow people to denounce their neighbors as supposedly informing on them or being sympathizers to Batista. And through these means, he would gain ground, legitimacy. Sometimes he paid folks in material kind, etc. But he certainly engaged in a lot of executions of informants. And so we have journalists like Guayo reporting on that, at least as far as they could under the circumstances, unless they were witnesses to it. In our collections, we have Andrew St. George, who was a witness to it, who accompanied Raul's forces for a long time. So that matters because Raul's forces numbered about 3,000. You know, that's a lot of people for a guerrilla army. And they really controlled, together with Fidel, that whole central and most of Oriente for a good chunk until we get to January 59. What does really matter, however, is that the numbers of people who were members of the opposition elsewhere and members of guerrilla forces elsewhere was quite high. So there was a totally different guerrilla force in the central highlands that does ultimately combine their efforts with Che Guevara in the scene that you saw of victory. He wasn't the only victor. And that was originally founded by students at the university, the Directorio Estudiantil. It was very anti-communist. So that made them very difficult allies for Che and his folks and Camilo, who was also with Che's troops. But more importantly, beyond that, you had at least 20,000 members, card-carrying members, as we could call them, of the 26th of July movement, who really had no loyalty to Fidel Castro at all. They didn't really know who he was, nor did they know him, personally. In some kind of, they could recognize his face. They were very loyal to the platform of the 26th of July movement and to whoever had recruited them, because this is based on cells. Majority of those folks are professionals and middle class, and they were largely organized by the Secretary General of the 26th of July movement, who was an engineer named Manuel Ray, and who very quickly, in fact, becomes Minister of Public Works after 59, and then resigned in October of 1959 when Camilo Cienfuegos, quote, disappeared. And then more importantly, this guy, Uber Matos, and those of us who are familiar with Cuban history remember, this important commander, same rank as Fidel, Uber Matos, we saw him in the clip. He resigns because he contends that there are lots of communists moving up in the ranks of the army that have never achieved any or have no merits for that. And Fidel basically says, no, you cannot resign. The letters are made public. The letter of resignation is made public because there's still an independent press. And ultimately, Uber Matos, by December of 59, would be jailed for 20 years. So that moment is really pivotal. And it says a lot about the nature of the opposition that, effectively, the folks who really contributed to the making of the revolution have nothing to do with the folks on whom Fidel Castro would rely, who are the secret members of the Communist Party. It was a secret organization, as well as Marxists like Che Guevara and Raul, who had their credentials, ideologically at least, and who were hoping to radicalize the situation from the beginning. So forgive me for the length of that answer, but it's important to recognize that it was not just a simple one army against another.
Yeah, thank you for covering that, Lillian. That was exactly my question. It seems like Guayo at the beginning was like most of the Cuban population, for the revolution because of the lie. Mm-hmm. And he realized after the treason and la traición that happened, and switched, as Professor, I believe.
No, Martha.
Martha mentioned in her presentation. And so it's interesting that those individuals and commanders that were with him at the beginning and throughout the revolution mysteriously all disappeared or were killed. And I was able to speak to Manuel Ray, who you spoke to, who then lived in Puerto Rico with his son and started an engineering firm called Ray and Ray in San Juan. And he told me the story. So
that's wonderful. We have here the oral history that I conducted with Manolo, as he was known, Manolo Ray, in February of 2009. And the man spoke at, over the age of 80 and having had 3 strokes for almost 9 hours in one day and filmed. It's amazing. So, and we have that here. I donated it, but he was instrumental in so many ways in introducing me to a lot of this history and helping me to create a book that was published several years ago, as was Guayo, I want to say, that covers the 40s through the 50s. And Guayo was a big part of the scene in the 40s as one of the major contributors to the consolidation of journalism as a way by which Cubans could ensure their own power as citizens before what was then an elected government. That's great that you know Manolo Ray. That's great. And Aurora, his wife, amazing.
Anyone else with a question or comment? All right, if not, I think what we'll do is we'll wrap up. I will say, those of you who are sitting here in the front that were invited specifically by Luis, and as he says, families and friends, we're going to take you upstairs to see the Martí portrait and to have a little time with Luis. But the rest of you are free to go. And thank you so much for coming. We will, as you've seen, with a little technical difficulty, we've been recording this. We'll do closed captioning. We'll post it and have a link, which we'll share with all of you. And We'll also share the link to the finding aid that Martha has so nicely prepared, because that will give you a sense of the collection.
I wanted to ask, is the things that have been digitalized, are those available online or
Not yet.
not yet?
Not
But will they be?
Yes.
Okay.
So we do keep a very large digital collection, and as a new collection like this gets prepared, we'll start putting parts of it up online, and then gradually, as we have, as Lily said, as we have the time, as we have the resources and get more, we'll expand it out. But we try to keep a significant amount of material online, because we know not everybody can get here in person to see it, and it's so important that it be available and that people know it's here. So.
Just want to add, this has been done in a quick manner. You know, the collection was, it was picked up in May or June of last year.
It was like June 1st, the first week in June.
June 1st or
anyway.
so.